Welcome to The Explainer. I'm really thrilled to have you here today because we are stepping into what I can literally only describe as a bureaucratic true crime story. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're exploring a dense but absolutely fascinating Supreme Court of the Philippines ruling, specifically GR number 191946. Now, on the surface, I know this might sound like a super dry case about accounting protocols in a government agency, but as we go through this today, you're going to see a gripping narrative unfold. We're talking missing oversight, the dangerous allure of workplace shortcuts, and a paper trail that led straight to the highest court in the land. We are breaking down the anatomy of a scandal that completely shook the Department of Public Works and Highways, or DPWH, back in 2001.
Right away, we need to talk about the scale of this issue. 139 million pesos. That is the staggering total involved in this 2001 DPWH vehicle repair anomaly. We're looking at more than 7,000 separate transactions that were flagged for alleged illegal disbursements of funds. People were completely bypassing proper procedures for emergency purchases and repairs of DPWH-owned motor vehicles. Now, what's really wild here is that this massive number didn't just happen all at once in some giant heist. No, it was the result of thousands of tiny, seemingly harmless administrative shortcuts stacking up, day after day, until they formed a mountain of compromised taxpayer money.
To truly understand why this case matters so much, we kind of have to ground ourselves in the absolute foundational rule of government service. It's right there in the 1987 Philippine Constitution. A public office is a public trust. It's a really simple phrase, but the weight of it is immense. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Bureaucratic red tape, the forms, the countersignatures, the approval hierarchies, they don't just exist to annoy employees. They exist primarily to protect public money. They're the barricades that ensure transparency and honesty. When you bypass that red tape, you aren't just saving time, you're actually breaking that public trust.
Which brings us to Section 1, Meet the Accused, resuming in on Vehicle Tag 211.
Now, to understand how a scandal of this magnitude actually operates on the ground, we need a really quick crash course in government accounting mechanics. Don't worry, I promise I'll keep it simple. There are two vital documents you need to know about. First, the OROA, or Request for Obligation and Allocation. Think of this as basically the permission slip that reserves a specific amount of money from the budget for a specific purpose. Second, the DV, or Disbursement Voucher. This is the document used to actually authorize the physical payout of that money. In a totally transparent system, these two documents march side by side, perfectly matching.
So let's meet the human element of our story. These are the three key employees caught in the crosshairs over the unauthorized emergency repair for that specific Nissan pickup truck, Vehicle Tag 211. We have Rogelio Beret, the chief of the Subsidiary and Revenue Section. He's the supervisor, the boss, tasked with financial oversight and delegated the authority to sign off on specific amounts. Then we have Melissa Espina and Violeta Tudeo, both carrying the title of Accountant Third. They're the bookkeepers. They're the ones working down in the engine room, responsible for controlling allotment releases and recording the accounting entries on those disbursement vouchers we just talked about.
So what happens when people decide the rules are just too tedious? Let's move to Section 2, the danger of shortcuts, breaking the rules.
Let's break down the exact procedural shortcuts they took, just as they were mapped out in the Supreme Court documents. First, ROA amounts were altered heavily without any countersignatures verifying the change. Second, the bookkeepers started lumping multiple disbursement vouchers into a single ROA. Third, they charged these emergency repairs to the wrong funds, specifically to the Capital Outlay Fund. And fourth, they completely bypassed higher authority approval. Now you might be wondering, why does charging to capital outlay matter so much? Well, under the General Appropriations Act, capital outlay is meant for infrastructure, things like roads, bridges, and highways. It's kept under intense scrutiny by management to prevent abuse. So charging an emergency vehicle repair to a rural road project fund without top-level clearance? That is a massive, massive red flag.
Now, let's look at Rogelio Beret, the supervisor. The Supreme Court found his failures to be, honestly, pretty staggering. Beret was only authorized to sign off on amounts up to 200,000 pesos. Yet, he signed an ROA where the amount had been noticeably altered. Like, literally crossed out and changed from 24,980 pesos all the way up to 269,350 pesos. And he did this despite the complete absence of a countersignature from the requesting authority approving that massive jump. He didn't ask questions, he didn't check who altered it, he simply signed it, completely bypassing the higher authorities required for such an action. This is really the ultimate failure of supervisory oversight. Which brings us to the climax of this entire explainer. When Bure was finally called out for signing these wildly altered documents that far exceeded his authority, his main defense was incredibly simple. He said he just relied on the review made by the employees under his supervision. He just assumed they did their jobs right. So we really have to ask ourselves, is blindly trusting your staff a valid legal defense when you're the one actually holding the pen?
That brings us to Section 3, the rubber stamp defense, and the legal danger of simply relying on your subordinates.
Let's start with the bookkeepers, Espina and Tadeo. Their defense was basically workplace expediency. They argued it had been a long-standing practice in the office to summarize various DVs into a single ROA, just to make the task simpler and save some time. But the Supreme Court countered that with a pretty harsh reality. Government accounting protocols absolutely do not condone this. The law requires accounts to be kept in strict one-to-one detail to safeguard against misleading information. Every single request for disbursement needs its own corresponding ROA. Lumping them together just masks the absence of supporting documents. In the eyes of the court, saving a little time is absolutely no excuse for muddying the waters.
And here is Bure's rubber stamp defense. He claimed he didn't examine the documents closely because his subordinates had already initialed them. But the Supreme Court fundamentally rejected this idea. The court ruled that holding a supervisory position vests you with discretionary power. You aren't there just to physically sign your name. You are there to meticulously and personally examine the truth and authenticity of what you're actually signing. When an amount jumps from 24,000 to nearly 270,000 pesos with zero countersignature, a supervisor cannot legally just shrug and say, well, my team said it was fine. So after years of appeals all the way up the chain, the gavel finally fell. This is Section 4, the Supreme Court's verdict.
The final rulings really reveal the heavy price of taking administrative shortcuts. Rogelia Bure was found guilty of gross neglect of duty. His breach was considered flagrant and palpable, resulting in absolute dismissal from service, forfeiture of all his retirement benefits, and perpetual disqualification from ever holding public office again. Melissa Espina and Violeta Tadeo were found guilty of inefficiency and incompetence. Their penalty was a severe suspension of 8 months and 1 day completely without pay, coupled with a demotion in rank or a diminution in salary. The court made it crystal clear. Turning a blind eye isn't just a minor mistake, it is a highly punishable offense.
If you take only one thing away from our explainer today, let it be this exact quote derived directly from the ruling. Expediency in the performance of duty should not be resorted to in exchange for transparency and accuracy. This is exactly why this case matters to all of us. When government employees cut corners just to make their own lives a little easier, they compromise the exact systems designed to protect the public's money. Transparency must always beat expediency. We've seen how a single altered document, ignored by a boss and lumped together by bookkeepers, completely unraveled careers and contributed to a 139 million peso anomaly. It really forces you to look at your own daily routines, doesn't it? So I'll leave you with this thought. If a simple, everyday accounting shortcut can lead all the way to the Supreme Court and result in total dismissal, how secure and how accountable are the procedures in your own workplace? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep asking the right questions.